No one saw it coming. Not the host, not the guests, not the millions watching from couches, phones, hospital rooms, truck stops, or military bases. It was supposed to be a calm conversation, a roundtable on ethics and leadership. Denzel Washington sat quietly, arms folded, respectful as always. Then came the moment. He leaned forward. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired. The kind of tired that comes from years of watching something you don't understand. Donald Trump, Denzel said, is a soulless crook. Not a leader, not a patriot, just a man obsessed with power. Silence. The host opened his mouth, then closed it. One panelist glanced at the floor. Another shifted uncomfortably in her seat. And at home, people gripped their remotes, unsure what they'd just witnessed. Some cheered, some cried, some turned the TV off in disbelief. In a diner in Michigan, a Vietnam vet stood up and walked outside into the cold. He had voted for Trump, twice, and something about that moment, something in Denzel's voice, cracked his heart open. Not because he believed it, but because it hurt that someone like Denzel would say it. It felt like betrayal. Hours later, a sea of American flags waved under bright stadium lights in Richmond, Virginia. The energy was electric, like thunder waiting to strike. The crowd was restless. They had seen the clip. They were waiting. And then, like a wall of fire, President Donald J. Trump stepped on stage. He didn't smile. Not right away. He adjusted the mic, took a long breath, and looked out over the thousands who had come to hear him. Denzel Washington, Trump began. Another washed-up actor pretending to be a political prophet. Laughter rang out. People clapped. But then Trump's tone shifted. Stick to reading scripts, he continued, because you were never meant to write history. He paused. The moment hung in the air, and then quietly, like a man addressing not enemies, but wounded friends. If he knew anything about patriotism, he'd know it starts with respect, not slander. The crowd erupted. But behind the roar, Trump's face didn't change. Because for him, it wasn't just politics. It was pain. He had watched glory. He had cried watching Remember the Titans. He had respected Denzel. And now, this? It wasn't just about winning. It was about loss. Later that night, long after the rally lights dimmed and the cheers faded, Trump sat alone in a quiet room. The gold trim and velvet chairs around him felt distant. On the small TV screen, Denzel's face froze, eyes locked, mouth firm. Trump had replayed the moment 5 times. Soulless crook. Each word echoed. He didn't flinch. He didn't rage. He didn't tweet. Not this time. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out something unexpected, a DVD. The 2001 classic John Q. He turned it over in his hands. A father who'd do anything to save his son, Trump whispered. That's what made people love him. He remembered watching it with Barron, popcorn in their laps, Melania smiling beside them. Now the man from that screen had called him a fraud. Trump looked out the window. America was watching, divided again. And he wasn't thinking about votes. He was thinking about the people who heard Denzel's words and might believe them. How do you lead a country when someone they admire tells them you're the enemy? And deeper still, how do you heal a heart that once respected you, now broken in silence? That same night, on opposite sides of the country, 2 fathers watched the news unfold in silence. In Pennsylvania, James Miller, a retired coal miner, held his granddaughter close as the headlines scrolled across the screen. Denzel calls Trump a soulless crook. Nation reacts. James had voted for Trump because he felt seen for the first time. He wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, but he believed Trump fought for men like him. Meanwhile, in California, David Jenkins, a single black father and former Marine, turned the volume up. He admired Denzel, had for decades, but his heart tightened. Something about tonight didn't feel right. Both men sat with the same ache in their chests, not from anger, but confusion. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Politics wasn't supposed to hurt. In kitchens and living rooms across America, families were no longer debating taxes or health care. They were asking deeper questions. Who do we trust? Who represents us? And what happens when 2 men we once admired stand on opposite sides of the battlefield? It wasn't just a culture clash, it was personal, and every American heart was caught in the crossfire. Melania Trump was brushing her hair when her phone rang. The hour was late, but the name on the screen made her answer instantly. Ivanka. "Mom, have you seen what Denzel said?" Melania's voice was calm. "Yes." There was a long pause. "It's going viral. Dad didn't say anything wrong, but people are hurting." Melania turned to the mirror. She could see the weight behind her daughter's voice. Not politics, pain. "He called your father a man with no soul," Melania said, her accent firm. "Donald has given everything. He's not perfect, but he has heart. He cares." Ivanka was quiet. "I know. But when someone like Denzel says that, people listen, even the ones who used to love Dad." That night, Melania walked into their bedroom, found Trump sitting silently at the edge of the bed. No phone, no TV. She sat beside him. "You've done more than they know," she whispered. "Let the truth be louder than their words." He didn't reply, just nodded slowly. Because for all his strength, Trump still felt the sting of betrayal, not from an enemy, from someone he once respected. Somewhere in Washington, an envelope sat on a desk, sealed, stamped, but never sent. President Trump had written it just after the rally. Handwritten, no aides, no press team, just him and a legal pad. It began simply, "Dear Mr. Washington, I grew up watching men like you, strong, noble, fierce, but fair. I taught my son that you were one of the greats. I don't know what made you say what you said, but I wish you'd called me. You've never sat with me behind the scenes. You've never seen the nights I didn't sleep. You don't have to like me, but I ask you, for the country's sake, don't pour gasoline on an already burning house. We don't need more fire. We need fathers to lead, not divide. Donald J. Trump." He folded it carefully, looked at it for a long time, but he never mailed it, because part of him still believed that maybe Denzel would see past the noise and reach out first. Sometimes, even the strongest men hold on to hope, and tonight, hope was all he had left. The rally had ended, but one teenager hadn't moved. 15-year-old Caleb Moreno stood near the back, arms folded, heart racing. His dad had brought him here. It was their first event together in months, their bond strained by silence and political arguments. But tonight something shifted. When President Trump said, "Patriotism starts with respect," Caleb didn't hear anger. He heard something rare in politics: pain. That word, respect, hit differently. You see, Caleb didn't love politics, but he loved movies. He had grown up watching Denzel, idolized him, quoted his lines, wrote an essay about fences in 8th grade. And now, the man on the big screen had insulted the man standing on stage. Caleb looked over at his dad, who was wiping his eyes quietly. A man who worked 2 jobs and had never asked for recognition, only dignity. For the first time, Caleb understood. This wasn't about left or right. This was about men trying their best. And suddenly, Caleb felt a strange ache in his chest. Because maybe, just maybe, both Denzel and Trump were hurting in ways the cameras couldn't show. And in that hurt, America saw itself. Mrs. Elaine Robbins had taught U.S. history for 27 years in a small Tennessee town. She had always preached balance, facts, context, listening. But today, she walked into her classroom with heavy eyes and trembling hands. The night before, she'd watched Denzel's words, then Trump's reply. And something inside her cracked. She had grown up admiring both men. Denzel for his quiet strength, Trump for his unflinching determination. But now, her students sat divided. Half wore Trump hats. The other half quoted Denzel's interview. The tension in the room was thick. So she did something she never planned. She turned off the lesson plan, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote, "Who do we become when we stop listening?" And then she cried. Right there, in front of 27 kids. A boy in the back stood. "Ma'am, why are you crying?" She wiped her face and said softly, "Because I remember a time when we could admire 2 different men and still see the best in each other." Silence filled the room. A respect no textbook could teach. And in that moment, as eyes met across the aisle, something small but sacred was born. Empathy. Early the next morning, Denzel Washington stepped out of his California home before sunrise. No cameras, no reporters, just fog and silence. He needed to think. He walked through the hills above the city, his footsteps slow. The clip had reached over 50 million views in less than 24 hours. Pundits called it brave. Some said reckless. But none of them knew what he felt. Guilt. Not because he thought Trump was right, but because of the division his words had deepened. He never wanted war. He wanted truth. He thought about his father, a Pentecostal preacher who taught him to speak with both conviction and compassion. Had he forgotten that second part? He remembered the first time he met Trump years ago at a fundraiser. Trump had been surprisingly warm, talked about Barron, even asked about Denzel's son. It wasn't fake, it was human. And now, that same man had stood in front of thousands and said, "We need fathers to lead, not divide." The words stung because they weren't political. They were personal. Denzel reached the hilltop, looked over the city, and whispered, "Maybe it's time to fix what I helped break." The morning sun began to rise. In a small room in Iowa, 72-year-old Roy Barnes stared at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly. He hadn't slept since the interview. Roy wasn't a man of emotion. He had served in Vietnam, buried 2 brothers, and built his house with his own hands. But something about Denzel's words tore through him like shrapnel. He had watched Trump closely over the years. No, the man wasn't polished. But Roy had seen something most missed: fight. Trump fought for things other politicians tiptoed around, and Roy respected that. But Denzel? Roy had loved Denzel, watched every film, told his grandson once, "That man speaks with his soul." Now, he didn't know what to believe. Was Trump really what they said? Or had Denzel let anger twist his view? At 3:14 a.m., Roy got up, made coffee, and wrote a letter by hand. "Mr. President, I don't know what's true anymore, but I know this. You've kept promises no one else dared to make. That counts for something. Don't let bitterness win. You still have people out here. You still have me. Roy." He folded it, sealed it, and cried. For the first time in years. In a sleek LA office, Denzel's longtime producer, Marcus Ellison, stared at 2 phones lighting up nonstop. One call after another. Agents, networks, foundations. Some praised Denzel, others begged for an apology. But Marcus didn't care about the politics. He cared about Denzel. And he was worried. He'd known the man for 25 years. Denzel didn't speak without purpose, but since the round table, something was off. He wasn't taking calls, not even his own. "Do you think he regrets it?" his assistant asked. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he opened an old video from 2017. Denzel at a charity gala. Trump had just entered office. Cameras captured them in a warm handshake backstage. Denzel's words still echoed. "You don't have to agree with someone to treat them like a human being." Now, the world was tearing itself in two. Marcus closed the laptop. What hurt most wasn't the public backlash. It was watching 2 men, both symbols of strength to millions, be swallowed by a war neither had asked for. Marcus picked up the phone again, and this time he dialed someone he hadn't called in years, Trump's former speechwriter. Because healing had to start somewhere. At the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, a photograph hung quietly on the 3rd floor. It showed Denzel Washington and Donald Trump shaking hands, smiling. The picture was taken before either man ever expected their paths to cross in conflict. Now that photo had become a flashpoint. A school group stood before it that morning. A teacher explained, "This moment reminds us that disagreement doesn't erase respect, or at least it shouldn't." One student, a girl named Alana, raised her hand. "But didn't Denzel call Trump evil?" The teacher paused. "He used painful words, yes, but sometimes we speak from wounds, not wisdom." And behind the tour, an elderly woman in a MAGA hat stood alone, staring at the photo. Her name was Judith. She had lost her husband to cancer 2 months ago. His favorite actor? Denzel. His favorite president? Trump. She whispered to the frame, "If only you two could see what this is doing to people like me." She touched the glass with her fingers and walked away, crying. Because when leaders clash, It's not just headlines, it's hearts. And hers was breaking in silence. In a quiet church in Alabama, Pastor Elijah Brooks knelt before an empty pew. The news had worn him down, not the politics, the pain. He'd watched Denzel's comment replayed again and again, watched the president's response. And what haunted him wasn't who said what. It was the silence that followed, a silence that had crept into homes, workplaces, and pulpits. People no longer spoke. They chose sides. Pastor Brooks wiped his glasses, opened his Bible, and then did something he hadn't done in weeks. He prayed, not for victory, not for vengeance, but for healing. Lord, if these two men, who've carried so many hopes on their shoulders, are hurting, then help them see not through the eyes of anger, but of grace. That Sunday, he printed out 2 letters, one addressed to President Trump, the other to Denzel Washington. Both said the same thing. You have more in common than you think, and this country still believes in both of you. He mailed them that afternoon. No cameras, no politics, just faith. Because sometimes the first step to mending a nation is believing hearts can change. Barron Trump sat at his desk, headphones in, staring at a blinking cursor. He had started writing the email 4 times. To Denzel Washington, he wasn't angry, just confused. He remembered watching The Equalizer with his dad in the White House theater. Denzel was the only actor his father called fearless, and now that same man had called his father something else, a soulless crook. Barron didn't know politics the way his father did, but he knew his dad. He'd seen the long nights, the pressure, the way he still called his mother darling even when the world hated him. He also knew his father cried once, just once, the night Barron was sick in the hospital. Trump didn't leave the room, sat in the corner all night holding a Bible and whispering prayers. Was that the man Denzel was talking about? Barron typed, "You don't know him like I do," then deleted it. Because maybe the world wasn't ready to hear from a boy who saw a side of Trump no one else did. He closed the laptop, walked out to the balcony, and whispered to the wind, "I forgive you, Denzel." Denzel sat alone in his dressing room after a late-night interview. The lights were off, just the soft buzz of a fridge in the corner. The host had tried to stir more controversy, asked if he stood by his words. Denzel had dodged the question, but his heart wasn't dodging anything. He pulled out his phone, opened a message he'd saved in drafts. It was from Marcus, his longtime producer. "This isn't just about you and Trump. This is about us, all of us. You said what you felt, but maybe now the world needs what you believe." He stared at those words for a long time, then opened his photos. There it was, the handshake. That one picture. Him and Trump, years ago, smiling, laughing. What changed? Was it really Trump? Or had the world taught them both to put on armor and forget their shared humanity? Denzel whispered to the mirror, "Maybe it's time." He pulled out a notepad, wrote one line. "Mr. President, if you're willing to talk, not cameras, not politics, I'll listen. Just 2 men, for the sake of this broken country." He folded it, and for the first time in days, he smiled. It was nearly midnight when President Trump's phone buzzed. Private number, no message. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Hello?" A pause, then a familiar voice. "Mr. President, it's Denzel." Trump didn't speak at first. He sat back in his chair, glancing at the portrait of his father on the wall. "I didn't call for headlines," Denzel said softly. "I called because I've been thinking, maybe I crossed a line." Trump exhaled. "You said what you felt. I've done the same. This country's been yelling so loud, no one hears anything anymore." A silence passed that felt strangely comforting. Denzel broke it. "What if we did something together? Something real. No cameras, just a room, a table, 2 men." Trump's voice cracked, barely noticeable. "You'd really sit with me?" Denzel replied, "If we don't show people how to disagree with dignity, who will?" There was no script, no press, just a handshake over the phone, a quiet promise. In a storm of noise, 2 giants had chosen peace. Not because they were the same, but because they were strong enough not to be. A week later, in a private hall in Pennsylvania, 2 chairs faced each other. No stage, no crowd, Just President Donald Trump in a dark suit and red tie, and Denzel Washington in jeans and a quiet, weathered stare. They shook hands. Firmly, Trump spoke first. "People think they know us, but they don't know our hearts." Denzel nodded. "They only see the surface, what the headlines want." For hours they talked. About fatherhood, about America, about the weight of being misunderstood. Trump told him about the night he sat beside Barron's hospital bed, holding Melania's hand, praying out loud like a boy lost in the dark. Denzel shared how fame made him feel like a ghost in his own home, how he'd once cried in a Walmart parking lot after seeing a homeless veteran saluting a torn flag. They didn't always agree, but they listened, and for once, that was enough. When they stood to leave, Trump extended his hand again. This time, Denzel pulled him in for a hug. Two men, opposite worlds, same country. They didn't solve everything, but they started something rare, something true. The news never aired the meeting. There were no press releases, just a blurry photo leaked days later. The hug. No caption. No sound. But that image said everything. Across America, something shifted. In coffee shops, old friends stopped arguing and started asking, what would they have said? In homes, kids asked their parents, "Can people really change their minds?" At a school in Chicago, a fourth-grade girl raised her hand and said, "I think real leaders say sorry sometimes." But the most surprising moment came when President Trump, standing at a podium days later, looked into the crowd and said, "I met with a man I once called an enemy, but today, I call him brave." The crowd stood in silence. No chants, just stillness. That night, Denzel wrote in his journal, "We didn't fix a nation, but we reminded it of something deeper. That respect is the last sacred thing we can still give each other." And in that silence, he smiled. Trump smiled. And maybe, just maybe, America did too. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Leave a comment. What moment broke you the most? Tap like to show the world that unity still matters. And subscribe, because the stories that heal us must be shared.